On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Good evening, fellow travellers. Welcome along to Neil Oliver Live on GB News TV and on radio. Tonight on the show, I'll be talking to actress and biohacker Davina Taylor about the importance of food, how it's the basis of our health and how we can and should eat better. I'll have an update on the continuing protests by Dutch farmers as they continue to try and protect their industry against their own government. We'll ask if women are having adverse menstrual and gynecological problems relating to the Pfizer jab, plus a fantastic Great Britain as usual tonight, and plenty of chat with my panellists, Julie Cook and Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford. But first, an update on the latest news from Ray Ad.
Thanks, Neil. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Ireland's Taoiseach Leo Varadkar says a deal on the Northern Ireland Protocol could be made in the next few days, but there's still a gap in negotiations. It comes as the Prime Minister faces criticism after proposing a meeting between King Charles and the President of the European Commission. Ursula von der Leyen was due to continue talks with Rishi Sunak before meeting the King, but her trip has now been cancelled. Labour says it would have had constitutional implications. Speaking exclusively to GB News, the Foreign Secretary said the government was looking for cross-community support for any deal.
We remain focused on the outcome rather than the method, and the outcome is to protect Northern Ireland's place in the United Kingdom, to make sure that people and businesses and the political representatives of those people in Northern Ireland are comfortable with the resolution, whilst also making sure that we protect the UK internal market. Those are very much our motivations. That's what will drive our actions.
Well, most members of the G20 have condemned the war in Ukraine, except for China and Russia, who refused to sign a joint declaration. It comes as Ukraine's president says he plans to meet China's Xi Jinping after Beijing set out a peace plan for the two countries. Volodymyr Zelensky says it would be beneficial for security around the world.
It's correct to think that if there are already thoughts that somehow correspond to respect for international law, territorial integrity and some security issues, I believe we should use this and work with China on this matter. Why not? I want to believe that China will be on the side of a fair peace, which means on our side. This is very important to me. I really want to believe that China will not supply weapons to Russia.
Well, Russian citizens living in Britain have staged a protest outside the Russian embassy in London against their country's invasion of Ukraine. It comes a day after the one-year anniversary of the start of President Putin's incursion. The widower of poisoned dissident Alexander Litvinenko, who was there, said she was proud of the protesters.
I'm very proud to see this big crowd of Russian people, a lot of young people. Maybe never went to this kind of protest, but I saw their faces and they've been all very loud to say how they're against the war, how they support Ukraine, how they hate Putin.
In other news, the death toll from the earthquakes that hit Turkey and Syria has now surpassed 50,000. The United Nations estimates that 1.5 million people have been made homeless, with 500,000 new homes needed. President Erdogan is pledging to rebuild within the year, but experts are warning not to put safety before speed. A 3.7 magnitude earthquake was felt in South Wales last night. The British Geological Survey says it hit Bryn Mawr near Crickhowell just before midnight, with the tremor felt as far away as Cardiff. Residents on social media have described being woken up to having their whole house shaking. Hundreds have gathered in County Tyrone to demand an end to violence in Northern Ireland after the attempted murder of an off-duty policeman. Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell was shot outside a sports centre on Wednesday. He remains in critical condition. 5 suspects have been arrested. Detectives say the incident is being treated as terror-related and could be connected to the new IRA. The Defence Secretary says he's confident that the troubled project to build nearly 600 Ajax fighting vehicles has now turned a corner. The £5.5 billion programme has faced criticism over severe delays and technical issues. After nearly 13 years, it's yet to deploy a single tank. Ben Wallace says soldiers are now being trained in how to use them and hopes they'll be active in the military within the next 2 years.
Well, when I took over as Secretary of Defence 3.5 years ago, this was a troubled programme. It started its life in March 2010, and I was determined that we were either going to fix this or have to find alternatives. And so we put a lot of effort into it. We worked with General Dynamics, the prime contractor, and with the Army. And I think after its user trials that it completed at Christmas time, it started to turn a corner.
And thousands of displaced Ukrainians are being given the chance to go to the Eurovision Song Contest in May. Around 3,000 tickets will be made available to those who are currently living here in the UK. Liverpool has been chosen to host on behalf of Ukraine, who won last year. The government has announced that £10 million in funding to make sure the event showcases Ukrainian culture will be made available. We're on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Back now to Neil Oliver Live.
They're rationing tomatoes in the supermarkets. We're told it's about supply chains, bad weather and the price of heating. But right now, in terms of the messaging, I suspect it's more about pushing the word. Rationing. Less about any believable shortage of food and more about getting us used to hearing the word. No doubt, if experience is anything to go by, the rest will come later. My money says the rationing app for our smartphones is already sitting on a hard drive somewhere, ready when we are. For now, it's more of a familiar process of psychological manipulation. Get us acquainted with the general idea of food scarcity so that we're well primed when the planned reality is unrolled. We were given the same treatment with words like lockdown and pandemic, mandate and denier, nudge, nudge. Rationing is a word from our parents' and grandparents' generation, a bit like war in Europe and fascist, and now they're back in fashion once more. Rationing. I ask you, while the landfills swell with fresh food dumped every day. The manipulation is invariably about an iron hand in a velvet glove, softly, softly, catchy monkey. Much of the messaging in the mainstream media is, and has been for years, redolent of World War II and the fabled Blitz spirit. We're all in it together, making do, mustn't grumble, doing our bit, standing up for democracy, defending the free world, sacrifice, keep calm and carry on. Someone somewhere must think our heads zip up the back. Since I've mentioned the D word, which is democracy, why not pause for a moment to consider whether any of us has had a chance to vote, voting being that part of democracy we're invited to think matters most, on any of this? Do you remember ever voting to give the government the power to lock us in our homes, to shut our children's schools, our pubs and restaurants, shops and businesses, to tell us who we could visit or have in our homes, whether we could go for a walk, travel within our own country, far less beyond these shores? Do you remember voting to empower employers to mandate medical procedures for their staff? And while we're on the subject of propaganda, who thought to convince us it was OK to demonise and exclude healthy fellow citizens on the grounds they might be carrying an invisible disease? If you don't remember whether or not you were invited to get involved in a conversation or a debate about all of this, perhaps it's because you were, quite understandably, distracted most of the time by the bombardment of state-sanctioned messaging by politicians and the mainstream media. Or maybe you were just afraid of the guaranteed ridicule or losing your job. It's not just us here in the UK either. I wonder how many US citizens ask themselves when they voted to have their government send well over $100 billion to Ukraine at a time of critical hardship for millions of Americans unable to afford food or heating. Rather than ask questions, or in the case of the tax-paying citizens of East Palestine, Ohio, liberally dusted as they are with fallout from a vinyl chloride mushroom cloud ignited with the go-ahead of their own elected officials after a train derailment, perhaps querying why their predicament is not the stuff of a national emergency, while fish die in their rivers and their pets and animals die in the fields. They're apparently expected to be reassured by the sight of Joe Biden posing for photos thousands of miles away in Ukraine, while air raid sirens provide sound effects and President Zelensky turns out once more in his freshly laundered combats. So many times over the past few years, I've thought to myself, who do these people think they are? All of them, once elected to office, herding us towards world war, taking away our natural freedoms. Who do these people think they are that feel empowered to disregard our liberty, our very existence as independent individuals, and spend their time posturing and politicking, fiddling while Rome burns? Who do these people think they are, blatantly creating and then ignoring hardship, enacting policies to wreck livelihoods, economies, and the well-being of millions, and then standing by while real people suffer the consequences of their vainglorious, self-serving nonsense disguised by propaganda shaped only to distract? And by God, do they need to distract us? Let's stop for a moment and think what the reality of the situation is. The undeniable reality, which is that we already have the potential for more than enough food, energy and everything else, courtesy of existing technology, and therefore any alleged shortages in the West are only fraudulent fiction. I said at the top we were being familiarised with rationing and making do. There's a glaring paradox in all of this. At the same time as being nudged into thinking we must do without, we're simultaneously drowning in surplus of every sort. We have centuries of affordable energy under our feet, and yet we're bullied into a false reality in which fewer and fewer people can afford to heat their homes or put fuel in their cars and vans. Every year we bulldoze millions of pounds worth of food into landfills, while now being told to do without erstwhile familiar foodstuffs. We do much the same with clothes made in sweatshops and worn once before discarding into those same landfills. We upgrade our phones and other tech and put last year's offering in the bin, disregarding the lithium and cobalt and the rest of the precious metals mined by child slaves out of sight and out of mind. We'll soon be ordered to junk our gas boilers and our petrol and diesel cars. Our governments siphon our taxes into subsidies for wind turbines and solar panels that will themselves be yet more toxic landfill in 20 years' time. It's not just about consumables that we can actually touch. Every moment of every day we're deluged with information as well, data, so-called news, but made increasingly incapable of discerning how much, if any of it, is worth knowing in the first place. So much chaff in which to hide the wheat. We're drowning in words, but struggling desperately to find so much as a sentence worth reading. Instead of being educated at school, learning objectively and meaningfully about our shared history, heritage and culture, about how to understand the world and contributing to its betterment, our children are too often indoctrinated with propaganda, drilled with ideologies predicated upon obsession, not with the content of people's characters, but with the colour of their skins and the nature of their sexual preferences, real or imagined. A television series that's been the work of hundreds, if not thousands of people spread over a year or more, an effort that was once the stuff of a shared experience keeping us engaged and talking together as communities for months on end, is binge-watched in a single night. In every way imaginable, our dopamine receptors, especially those of our children, are being bludgeoned into numbness. An 8-year-old boy with a smartphone and an internet connection can help himself in a week to more naked women in more positions and predicaments than Genghis Khan saw in a lifetime of murderous conquest. Sickening surplus and overload all around, and yet here we are, rationing food in our supermarkets. Pardon my French, but what the hell? Rationing tomatoes is just a symptom of how corrupted and bent out of shape our food industry has become, at the mercy of greedy corporations committed only to profit for the few at the expense of the health of the many. Let me stress not one jot of this is the fault of farmers, those out there in a government-made maze of regulations and obstacles to the job of producing healthy food for healthy populations. EU regulations make it legal to label as milk the white liquid obtained from processing almonds and oats. There are to be ground-up crickets in the bread and hundreds of other food products besides. Industrially processed vegetables are labelled chicken, fish and mince. They make oil from sunflowers and rapeseeds, process away its rancid, toxic nature and sell it in food and as salad dressing and as an ingredient in soap powder for getting stubborn stains out of clothes. It's in baby food as well. Tomatoes aren't in season in the UK in February, as you might have noticed. Why should they be? Why aren't we concentrating our attention on what food is in season and local and good for us and teaching people how to cook it? I travel a fair part of the length of this country every week between my home in Scotland and this studio in London. Aside from the odd moment or two of built-up area, the vast majority of the landscape is green fields. Why aren't we making the most of the fertile land with which we're blessed, instead of lofty talk of handing a third of it back to the beavers? If food is at a premium, reaching a point where rationing might be required, why are we paying farmers to get out of the business altogether and sell off their land to transnational corporations for God alone knows what purpose? Why are planes and ships burning fuel to transport avocados for thousands of miles around the world from places where the mass cultivation of the product causes catastrophic damage to local water supply? What do you think is the answer to these questions? Are our leaders so inexperienced, so clueless about the practicalities of the world that they just don't know how to run the country for the benefit of the people they're supposed to serve? Or are they knowingly in the service not of the people they're elected to represent, but of transnational corporations, the markets and the Bank for International Settlements? Which of the two options do you think it might be? Or is it simpler and more depressing still? Have our leaders in fact simply persuaded themselves that distraction is the only game they need to play? Are we simply to be fed a diet of propaganda and downright lies about health and food and the climate and war and biology and race until we're so unwell, confused, exhausted and anxious we won't notice when they pick the last penny out of our pockets and lock us down in a digital ghetto, watched around the clock by cameras and listening devices we pay through the nose to carry in our own pockets? And they're rationing tomatoes. Here's the thing, the world has been run off the rails. No wonder it's all about distraction, because distraction is all they have. Greed and unrestrained power have brought us to the only destination that was ever in view, which is right here, right now. They won't fix the mess because the mess suits them. I don't have all the answers, but I do know the solution starts with ignoring any more of their nonsense. The problem is not with the tomatoes they're rationing. The problem is the surplus of lies they keep selling. Stop buying them. That's my opinion, of course, and you're free to disagree with me. Keep your tweets and emails coming all through the show. You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk and you can tweet me as well @gbnews, and I'll try to get to your comments later in the show. I'm joined this evening by journalist and author Julie Cook and by defence analyst and political commentator Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford. Good evening, both.
Good evening.
Thanks for being here. Julie, rationing tomatoes and the rest of it, do you feel you're being taken seriously, or do you think, like me, that we're just being distracted?
First of all, I think your monologue there really summed it up. I think we've been taught, or we've been indoctrinated into a world of planned obsolescence with everything. So whether it's, as you say, a phone being upgraded, a television that will eventually not work, parts that will break and need repairing and then chucked into landfills. And I think that forced obsolescence is linked very much to the idea that now you can't have tomatoes, because we're taught we're a throwaway society, first of all, and also the fact that tomatoes, as you rightly said, aren't even available in February. Again, it's that kind of now culture that we've all sort of got to unlearn, I think. I'm guilty of it. I love tomatoes year round, but there's nothing better than a tomato made in Britain in July, you know. And so I think it's all very much linked, and it's all quite frightening, really.
Stuart, I think it's distraction. I think that's at the heart of it. I think there's such a mess that's there deliberately or by accident, by ineptitude or by bad luck, let's say, and rather than fix it, they just try to keep us looking the other way. Yeah. I said heads zipped up the back.
Yeah.
Do you feel taken unseriously?
Well, I think that, I mean, if I could just maybe go back to the bit about we're meant to live in a democracy. The problem is that we're living in what's called a representative democracy, as you know. And our elected representatives are meant to represent their constituents. But when they are elected, they seem to make this transition between representing their constituents and representing their political party and just telling their constituents what's going to happen. And I'm quite a fan of direct democracy, which is a sort of sometimes painted as a sort of perpetual
referendum.
Professional referendum,
day,
yes.
Yeah.
And I think that that's dangerous as well. But I think really we need to be much more careful about our elected representatives and the means whereby we can recall them if they're not representing us properly. I feel lied to, though. Do you feel you're in receipt of the truth from the very people that you might want to hear the truth from? And, I mean, again, you saw me smiling when Ben Wallace was on there saying that the ill-fated and disastrous car crash that is the Ajax armoured car programme is now on track. I mean, it's just nonsense. All they've done is put in a few cushions to stop the vibration, a few grommets in the wheels to stop them rattling, and told the guys to wear 2 sets of ear defenders. It's taken so long to come into service that it's going to be obsolescent when it comes to the front line. So yes, we're being lied to. And we're being lied to because people are more interested in preserving reputations than delivering a good deal.
Yeah, I mean, tomatoes are off the menu, but we're just expected to deal with this diet of non-stop nonsense. We're on a break already, after which food is the basis of our health. So how could we be eating better? Actress and biohacker Davina Taylor will be here to give us some tips. See you in a couple of minutes.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back already to Neil Oliver Live. In the West, we live in a world of obesity, diabetes, general ill health, depression and anxiety, or so it seems. It also seems to me that it's the food industry that pumps us full of the processed pap, sugar and vegetable oil that makes us sick and sad from cradle to grave. A new injection from Big Pharma, Ozempic, is billed as the antidote to obesity and might be the most expensive such treatment in history. No surprises there. My first guest tonight, actress and biohacker Davina Taylor, has made it her business to understand how the food we eat is the ultimate key to health. Good evening.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Good to see you. I'm getting more and more obsessed with this subject of food and how it underpins everything about us, physically, psychologically, and the work. What's been your food journey?
OK, so I've got 4 kids, 4 boys, and after I had number 3, I do number them, which I know sounds terrible. After I had number 3, Asa, my mum got really ill with cancer, and I started comfort eating, and I couldn't stop. I had put down alcohol many, many years ago because that used to be my crutch, but food stepped in to comfort me, and I was being told by doctors, you know, you're borderline obese, etc. You just need to have a calorie-controlled diet. And I found that whole willpower thing very difficult. I'm quite addictive by nature. And all these whole grains, vegetable oils, hidden sugars, even in things like sausages, were just triggering my mechanisms in my brain to have more and more and more. And I couldn't get off this sort of peak and trough of sugars and stuff. And it was so debilitating because once I picked up something like cereal in the morning, I was on a roller coaster for the rest of the day, and it just knocks your self-esteem. I'm piling on weight, but the brain fog was the killer for me. I had no energy, no zest for life at all. And so after number 3, I got pregnant with number 4, and I changed my eating altogether.
And did you know, I mean, you were aware of feeling this, what you're describing as brain fog. Did you know it was food that was doing that to you?
Absolutely not. I just thought you had to have a carb-heavy diet. I mean, I still have carbohydrates now, but I time them. I have them at night. So I have, like, sourdough at night. So you literally have a carb coma, you know, like you would do after a roast dinner.
So you take bread to go to sleep?
I do. I do. Do you know what? It's better than Valium. It's not addictive. But and you can hack into your hormones to hack into your mental health. So I'm clear, productive during the day. I have lots of energy. Whereas at night time, I just nip into my melatonin production and I have a decent night's sleep. It's fascinating how you can do it. You can control your thinking.
So this is the hacking you're talking about?
Yeah, you hack into your biochemistry. It's biohacking. It sounds a bit space age, but it's not. It's super easy. It's just knowing your own body and your own triggers and stresses and mechanisms, and it's a fabulous industry.
But that really, I hear that strikes a chord with me, because I feel that we're told about public health, and I don't believe there is public health. I think there's just the health of the individual.
Yes.
And this idea that they've got, that they can come up with these one-size-fits-all, top-down solutions. Everyone take this. Everyone have a bit of this and you'll be fine.
It's ridiculous, of course. Like, somebody who is... Actually, to be honest, being a woman, it's a little bit more tricky because we are so complicated to track that they don't even test on us. They generally use men aged 25 or something,
really?
And we're supposed to be the same, you know. And also, there's a lot of constant fibre rhetoric. You have to have whole grains. I'm tracking my insulin, my sugar at the moment in my blood. And as soon as I have brown bread, whole grain bread, it spikes so ferociously right the way up the scale. And that triggers brain fog because your body's saturated with glucose. This is brown bread. It just turns into sugar. As soon as you consume it, it turns to sugar. So I may as well just have an ice cream. And talk to me as well. One of my sort of bête noirs at the moment is vegetable oil. Talk to me about... OK, sing me the song of vegetable oil. Vegetable oil, deemed a healthy polyunsaturated fat. Your body doesn't recognise it. It was originally used as a detergent to clean farmyard machinery. Then some clever guy decided, hang on, we've got another revenue of income, let's put it into the food chain. So... And it's rancid. It's rancid. They have to do all sorts to it. Oh, there's so many processes, I won't even go into it. And, you know, it's deemed heart healthy. It's the opposite. The body doesn't understand what it is. And actually, there's a correlation between the increased use of rapeseed oil, sunflower oil, vegetable oil, direct correlation with heart disease. So what was deemed heart healthy seems to be the catalyst for the opposite. And I'd argue that low in saturated fat diets are part of the reason why we've got this Alzheimer's epidemic. The brain runs on fat as a fuel, not sugar. We are demonising fat for what sugar did. And this veg oil is a detergent, so it strips your gut, all the mucus lining in your gut. You can't get any messages to your brain that you're satisfied, that you've had enough food, so you're constantly hungry. It's literally eating detergent. It's crazy. And it's everywhere. It's the same stuff that takes the stains out your clothes. The pink stuff. First, that's plant-based. So, I mean, it is absolutely preposterous that it's in there. Extraordinary. I mean, what do you think? Well, I mean, the whole basis, you know, everything is about food. That's the fundamental. That's what you run on. And if you're eating toxic rubbish... Well, I mean, I'm no expert, but, I mean, I've just been persuaded to go back to olive oil and butter, which I presume are much better. Yes, and lard. And lard, the body understands it. It has done for a millennia. And yet, I've sort of been inculcated into this idea that if you have vegetable oil or sunflower oil, it's somehow intrinsically more healthy. It's not even food. It's not food. And another crazy thing is, you know, the low cholesterol rhetoric. So the American Heart Association, their guidelines is basically where the rest of the world takes all its information from. They have got a tiny paragraph somewhere, like, within this biblical-sized document, and it actually says... Dietary cholesterol is no longer a molecule of concern for overconsumption, but guess what? We've done no press on it. So the doctors don't know because they're too busy prescribing statins, which is probably the biggest drug on the planet. And I'm not like a conspiracy theorist. No, it's a fact. It's there. It's there, but no one knows about it. Can we talk about statins very quickly? Are you saying statins are actually counterproductive? Well, actually, a lot of people are saying that it is triggering dementia. Right, the overuse of statins is draining the brain of its preferred fuel source, which is saturated fat. And cholesterol is what your brain is made... Every single cell in your body is made of cholesterol. It transports hormones. So I think a huge, big lid's going to be lifted on it soon. I mean, people actually, in the industry, people are calling Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes.
I mean, it's very... The only reason I ask is because my daughter is a doctor, and I'm of a certain age, clearly. I said, you're one of the few people, Dad, of your age that I know that isn't on statins. And I said, should I be taking them?
So many side effects.
Yeah.
So many side effects.
Julie, do you feel, when you hear this kind of conversation, when you hear this kind of information, it almost sounds sinister? You know, it almost feels as if we're being made ill so that another industry can make us, in inverted commas, better.
Exactly. And I mean, I was a teenager in the 90s, born in the 70s, teenager in the 90s, and in the 90s it was all about don't eat fat, don't eat fat, fats are bad. So as a teenager, when I was constantly worried about my weight, I grew up on Rivitas, brown breads,
Vitalites,
everything dry, no fats, you weren't allowed fats for the devil. And it's really hard to unlearn that as an older woman because you're told that. But now I know myself, having, not as much as you, of course, but having learned my own body over time, reaching my 40s and realising, fats are really, really important. And my brain doesn't work if I don't get fats. Salmons and things like that, that kind of fat. I feel absolutely dead if I don't eat fats. So it's really fascinating what you're doing and bringing this out because people still think it's bad.
That's why people have this misunderstanding of things like the keto diet. You know, people think it's about that it's eating meat all the time as protein, but it's not really. The emphasis is supposed to be on fat.
Yeah, I mean...
you're supposed to get the bulk of your energy from fat.
Because, like I mentioned before, with this, you can see with sugars and whole grains that we are recommended to eat. It goes up and down, and that down bit is where you start craving. That's the trigger point. That's when your dopamine's gone down, and that's when you start going... And these can be like every 20 minutes. So if you're in the office or something, you can't think because you're going, ooh, what picky bit shall I have? I mean, I start my day, I have MCT oil, which is a medium-chain triglyceride, and it goes into your liver and shoots to your brain, and your brain is instantly fueled with this brilliant ketone. And I start my day with that mixed into...
What is that derived from?
A coconut.
Right.
Yeah, it's a really fast, it's very short chains of carbon atoms. So unlike vegetable oil, it's like about 48 carbon atoms. This is about 8, and it shoots straight up to your brain. You get like a sort of a buzz, and you are not going to eat anything for a good couple of hours. So you can hyper-focus. I sell it, actually. But I mean, it's bizarre. People are saying, you know, what on earth are you doing to your coffee? We're tipping oil into it. But I'm just like hacking into my brain chemistry, so much so I've got a company now called Will Powders that I sell that because I'm so behind it, because there's so much addictive eating out there.
It's like that super coffee that people take where it's black coffee, but it's got butter and coconut oil in it.
Fatty coffee,
You've got a podcast about all of this as well, haven't you?
Because I just want to open up the question, open up the dialogue on why have we got all this misinformation and, you know, all the plant-based rhetoric. These teenagers are getting sucked into it and they need heme iron, they need B12. They're not going to get it from a supplement at all. So Hack Your Health is my new podcast, and I'm literally speaking to the experts on the front line, the professors who are right at the front of this amazing industry.
Yeah, I love the upfront shamelessness of some of it. You know, Pringles are, once you pop, you can't stop.
Absolutely, it's actually advertised. Yeah, I mean, that's a massive disclaimer. By the way, this is addictive, and that's the veg oil, and that's the hidden sugars. Yeah.
Davina Taylor, that was brilliant. Thank you so much. I could talk to you for the rest of the night about that. Obviously, you can tell. But we'll talk about this again. Thank you so much this evening. Another break is upon us. After that, I'll be getting the latest on the Dutch farmer protests as they fight to prevent their industry from being badly damaged by their own government. See you in a couple of minutes.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate. with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Hello again, welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. On this show, we've been reporting on and keeping up with the protests by Dutch farmers seeking to protect their industry from the depredations of their own government. The Netherlands are known as the little country that feeds the world, second only to the United States of America when it comes to food exports. I find that a fact hard to take in every time I read it. And yet farmers there are fighting tooth and nail to stop their government forcing through drastic reductions to the amount of farmland and the size of herds of livestock. Joining me now for an update on the situation is Ralph Schulhammer, lecturer at Webster Vienna Private University. Hello there, Ralph. Thanks for joining me.
It's great to be with you again, Neil.
Yes, great stuff. And now this protest by the Dutch farmers, it doesn't get the international attention that I think it deserves. What is the latest news? How is that situation developed?
I think there are two main points that we have to keep in mind. One is if we look at the most recent polls, the farmer citizen movement, which is kind of the political arm of the Dutch farmers, will do better than expected in the upcoming elections. So they have 1 seat at the moment. It's going to go up to 16 or 18 seats. But I think we also have to be critical in one respect. I think, as you mentioned just right, it was not covered that much outside media like GB News and others. And I think one problem that the Dutch farmers have is I think they could have and they should have connected their issue to a broader one, which is that in the Western world, we are increasingly at war with everything that makes modern life possible, right? It's farmers in the Netherlands, it's cows in Ireland, it's mining in Great Britain, it's nuclear power in Germany. This is part of a bigger picture where kind of under the guise of the climate movement and the green movement, pretty much everything that makes modern life possible is under attack. But instead of trying to fight back as a unified front, kind of we are split up in kind of these smaller battle groups that never unify to take on the broader ideological issue that I believe would have significant appeal all over the West. Outside the Dutch areas, I think this would be something that people are very sensitive to all over the West if we could find a way to frame it in exactly this kind of way.
And is anything being done to try and correct that shortfall that you're describing, that lack of joined up action and joined up protest? Are the feelers out to create that international network?
Not yet. And the problem is, and this was something I think both you and I were afraid of course, what now was happening was that a lot in the mainstream media and competing political parties, right, they were looking at the most fringe elements of these movements. And of course, then they use them, they draw most of attention to these fringe elements and say, see, they're all radicals. They're actually quote unquote bad people. They're morally bad people. And if you do not have an effective way to fight back, at least for some middle-of-the-road voters, that sticks. And then they might sympathize with your issues, but then in the voting booth, they say, well, they might be too radical after all. So this is always the uphill fight these new movements have to overcome. I mean, we saw Giorgia Meloni, like kind of in Italy, we see that politicians can do this, right? If they do it right, they can actually be rewarded at the voting booth after they have been in power. So I think this is the uphill battle that these new movements, to which I would count the Dutch farming movement and the citizens farmers movement, that they need to try to get to.
I described in my introduction that the Netherlands is the little country that feeds the world, and presumably that is the way in which the Dutch population see themselves as people who are farmers. That must be part of the national psyche. How are the general population reacting to the government's endeavours to cut this all back? To undo that identity.
Well, it's because it's the way it is framed, right? I feel that the government or those who want to take away those farms, they frame it a little bit better than those on the other side. Because what they do, and I think part of this is because they have been marinated in this themselves, we must not forget that over the last 60 years, all over Europe, right? Think about the last successful, big movies, whether it was Lord of the Rings or Avatar, right? It's always the story how artificial or industry or farming or agriculture in a sense is actually bad, right? We are wresting something from nature, and things would be so much better if we just would leave them be. And this is precisely what the anti-Dutch farmer movement says. They say, well, those farmers, they pollute the environment, they use fertilizers, they use machinery. They're like the orcs in Lord of the Rings, right? And those who fight against them are like the elves and those quasi-holy figures. And of course, this is not true. It should be exactly the opposite. As you correctly pointed out, it's a miracle that a country of the size of the Netherlands is one of the world's largest agricultural producers. Of course, this has an effect on the environment, just as mining has an effect on the environment, right? All of these things have an effect, but the question we have to ask, what is the alternative? I found the slogan that they used, no farmers, no food, was one of the most compelling ones. Is sure, you can give all these farmlands back to nature, but how exactly are you going to find something to eat on your plate? And I think that argument was not made forcefully enough.
Julie, how do you react? Ralph saying that there's a movement almost to take away the stuff of everyday life. The farmers, the cars, all the nuclear power, mining, all of these things going away. How do you react to that?
What he said is so succinct there. It's that, when you take away, especially the national identity of somewhere, so the farmers there, the miners here, when we had the coal miners, when we've seen what happened when you take that national identity of work away from people, they lose everything. Whole communities are still recovering from that loss that we've had, for example, with mining. The same's going to happen perhaps in the Netherlands, hopefully not with the way they're fighting back. But it's almost like we're basically going through the new technological revolution, aren't we? And under the guise of climate change. So they're being told, change this and that, make it more environmentally friendly, you're destroying the land. But actually, it's just more corporatism, and it's taking away the national identity, I think, of so many people around the world, especially, in this case, the farmers.
It is interesting, isn't it, Stuart, that, as he says, that is what the Netherlands are known for. They're farmers, they're producers of food. And that's being taken away from them. It seems...
Well, it seems counterintuitive, actually. I came late to this, but your correspondent, Eva Varingbroek, yes, has brought this up on Twitter time and again. Yes. I've read it with great interest. So I'm late to the debate, but it seems counterintuitive and counterproductive if the Netherlands is one of the biggest producers of agricultural produce in the world, to actually somehow to put penalties on it.
Yes.
It seems stupid.
Ralph, is there optimism as you describe the political situation shifting in the Netherlands, with some proper traction in the representing the general population? Are there grounds for hope?
At the moment, unfortunately, I have to say no. All of Europe and parts of the US and parts of the United Kingdom, we are in the grip of a common psychosis, which is expressing itself primarily in we want to turn against everything that makes civilized life possible. And we are very bad. I say we because I assume we're on the same side of this, and we are very bad in communicating this. So either you want to have a modern civilization, but then you're going to need all the things that the left hates. You need modern agriculture. We cannot go back to a society where 98% of the population work as farmers. We need agriculture that is so productive that only 2% work as farmers, so that the other, 98% can become, OnlyFans account holders and influencers, but all these, or green politicians, for that matter. So if this is what you want to have, right, then you need all these underpinnings as well. It is. Again, I cannot stress this enough. It's a little bit like in the time machine where I have to Eloy on the Morlocks, right? If you want to live like the Eloy, you need all these quote-unquote dark stuff, like, a steel industry, a fertilizer industry, a farming industry. You need the things. If we don't have them, like society, civilization will break down. And this is, I think, what all these movements, whether it's the pro-nuclear movement in Germany, whether it's the nuclear movement in the United Kingdom, the farmers movement in the Dutch, this is the argument they have to make. They are the pillars of civilization. If you undermine them, you undermine our civilization. And What that can lead to, that's then up to anybody's own fantasy. But I think this is the argument I have to make.
That's the note we'll end on, Ralph. Thank you so much for bringing us up to date. This is a preoccupation of this show here on GB News. So, Ralph Schulhammer, I'll be coming back to you in the future to hear yet more as we hopefully see a turn of events in the farmers' favour. It's another break, after which I'll be asking if women are having adverse gynecological problems relating to the Pfizer jab. Don't go away.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing. You see, amazing.
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. Now, much of the reporting on harmful side effects related to the products marketed as COVID vaccines has concentrated on young men and heart conditions like myocarditis. But a review of Pfizer's own data makes clear that across the board, in relation to multiple adverse effects, it has been women who have taken the brunt of the harms. Joining me now is journalist Sonia Elijah, who has conducted in-depth research to understand the scale of the problem. Sonia, thank you.
Thank you.
Such an important topic, an overlooked topic. What exactly is it that you have found out from reading that available data?
Yes. So really, for the past 2 years, I've been going through data that really the regulators don't want the public to see. The government doesn't want the public to see, and the pharmaceutical companies don't want the public to see. I've extensively gone through thousands of documents of the Pfizer data dump that was released via court order because the FDA wanted the public to wait till 2096. I've also analysed a recent EU safety update report that was released by the Freedom of Information Act, and it's really damning, the data that I found. Across the board, you've seen women 3 times more affected. So 3 times more of these cases were reported over women.
So for every young man who's affected by myocarditis or similar, there's 3 women are affected by other things and the same thing?
Yes. So, for example, anaphylaxis, you're looking at 8 times more affected by women. This was in a report I analysed over a year ago. But this recent EU report, you've got over 327,000 cases. A case is an individual, and over 1.1 million adverse events. So you've got, on average, 1 individual suffering from at least 3 to 4 adverse events. A third of the cases were classified as serious, and at least 84% of those cases, there was no history of comorbidity. Now, going back to the women, there was a section on menstrual disorders, And so the regulator, the European Medicines Agency, was responding to BioNTech and asking for an evaluation report because of the number of queries relating to menstrual disorders. The conclusion was, it's because women are possibly more affected because of the pandemic and it's all stress-related. That was what they concluded. The actual evaluation was in an appendix which they didn't release, so I couldn't analyse that. But we know that year the British Medical Journal published a study where they had 30,000 reports of women with menstrual abnormalities after the vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine. The following year later, in a journal called Vacunus, 78,000 reports by women, 52% had suffered from menstrual abnormalities. So it's happening, the data is real.
And why do you think, given how many women are being affected in this way, that this hasn't been reported at all? You know, there's been a certain amount, and here on GB News especially, we've gone to some lengths to talk about adverse effects like myocarditis. But all of this relating to women and gynecological problems and menstrual disorder, why is it not out there in the general conversation?
It's really shocking that it has. I mean, literally only recently the MHRA updated their website. This is February. This is very new, where they said there is a possible association with menstrual abnormalities and the COVID-19 vaccines, the Pfizer and Moderna's vaccine. So it's taken them so many months to just sort of formally kind of maybe acknowledge, well, maybe there's something going on here, when we have so much observational data going on. And then also there was a paper published the end of last year where by a leading obstetrician in America, and you have astounding data. They compared the flu shot, which has been around for 25 years, with the COVID-19 vaccines, and you have the number count, so 200 times more menstrual disorders. There's a huge increase in miscarriage rates. This is going on.
57-fold.
Yeah, it's shocking. It's really shocking. I also want to put out that looking through the Pfizer clinical trial data, no genotoxicity studies were ever done, no reproductive toxicity studies were ever done, no carcinogenicity studies were ever done, and they weren't planning on doing them. And the reason they said that was, because it's not deemed necessary. I mean, it's just so shocking.
Now, bear with me. Joining me next is my next guest, Dr. David Strain, who's a senior clinical lecturer at the University of Exeter Medical School. Hello, Doctor. We've spoken before in related subjects here. Thank you for joining me. How do you react listening to these findings and these figures that journalist Sonia Elijah is quoting?
Actually, a big part of that is not a surprise. When it comes to these menstrual irregularities, that is actually very common with any sort of inflammatory response. We do expect some degree of menstrual irregularities after any inflammatory things, such as the vaccine. And actually, it has now been backed up by fully systematic, randomised studies where they.
I'd just like to actually interrupt the doctor there.
Dr. Strain, can I just let Sonia wants to ask a question directly there?
The paper that Dr. James Thorpe and actually Dr. Peter McCullough co-wrote, they compared the COVID-19 vaccines with the flu shot. And they looked at 25 years of data. Yeah. And in the past 2 years, you've got the COVID-19 coming out, and it's astronomical, the increase in adverse effects affecting women with menstrual disorders, miscarriages, stillbirths. I mean, it's really shocking. So I do not believe that, it's just a side effect of any vaccine. That's incorrect.
But back to you, Dr. Strain. The first is that any inflammatory thing will give you these changes in the menstrual cycle. Then there's Dr. Thorpe's paper. Now, as you rightly point out, Dr. Thorpe's paper was looking at a numerical difference. So it was looking at the difference in the number of problems with menstrual issues from the flu vaccine compared to the COVID vaccine. And actually, a 200-fold increase is not a surprise when you consider who actually gets the vaccine. We don't give flu vaccines to people under the age of 50 in the UK. And therefore, spotting menstrual issues, spotting issues with miscarriages in people over the age of 50, they're just not going to be reported because we don't get menstrual issues in people over the age of 50. We don't get miscarriages, or very rarely get miscarriages in people over the age of 50, just because they're not getting it. We've then given the COVID vaccines to a whole range of people, right down to 18, and in some places we've given it to children. Now, you will see problems in the menstrual cycle in a population that is actually menstruating, and that's the big issue with Dr. Thorpe's paper.
But Dr.
I don't want to minimize the fact that the menstrual cycles are being deranged in people who have the vaccine. On average, it's about 3 days changes. On average, if you get, you will have a slightly heavy period the time afterwards.
David, why? David, if I can just butt in, if I can just butt in there, why, when the disease we're talking about poses very little threat to the women that we're talking about, why, in terms of a risk-benefit judgment, continue to offer that vaccination to women when there are at least these doubts raised by these figures? Why would you continue to recommend this vaccine to women, to pregnant women and the rest, seeing the shadow of doubt that must at least be raised by this kind of research?
So the latest range of boosters for the vaccines wasn't open to people under the age of 50. It was only open to people in particularly high-risk groups where the risk was substantially greater than the benefit. And this is amongst many of the reasons why the latest range of boosters wasn't offered to people under the age of 50. We are still in this process that we are learning both about the virus and about the treatments for it. And at the moment, we're in a position where the risk to benefit is not in favour of boosting people under the age of 50, and that's why they weren't invited. When it comes to pregnant women, however, pregnancy is itself its own risk factor, and that's a very detailed conversation that you need to have with the obstetrician when it comes to whether you'd like to be vaccinated or not and what your individual
Dr. Davidson, I just want to let Sonia is keen to interject.
Yeah,
here.
I just want to talk about pregnancy outcomes. So there was a study by Pinellas et al., and where it was so women who were pregnant actually had favoured better when they contracted COVID-19. They were not at higher risk. So any claim that women who are pregnant are at high risk of morbidity with COVID-19, that's an unsubstantiated claim. I looked through the clinical trial documents of Pfizer, post-authorization data. There were 270 pregnancy cases, and 238 were unknown. So out of the 32 that were known, 23 resulted in miscarriage. That's damning data, and people do not know.
Dr. Strain, is it good enough, really, to be saying that you're aware that we are aware of this kind of adverse effect, and just to move on from it and say, oh well, we're not doing that anymore? Is that good enough when you're up against this kind of 200-fold increase in these kind of effects in certain circumstances? To just move on and say, oh well, that's just been unfortunate and what you might have expected?
So the first thing is that 200-fold figure is a complete misrepresentation of the figures. It's like saying that there's an infinity-fold increase in menstrual problems in women compared to men. When we were comparing flu vaccines in people over the age of 50 and COVID vaccines in people who are still menstruating, there was bound to be a massive numerical difference. We then have to consider the different environment we're in at the time. When we first started giving the vaccine, we were still in a position where people were dying on a daily basis.
Dr. Strain, I'm going to run out of time here. So, thank you once again for your contribution to this intense debate, Sonia Elijah. Thank you so much. We're going to go into another break. It's coming up to 7 o'clock. This is Neil Oliver live on TV, online and on DAB plus radio.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here we are together again. Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live on GB News TV and on radio. Now tonight on the second hour of the show, in the wake of the shootings at Epsom College, a criminologist will be here to talk about changes we could make to gun laws to try and prevent such tragedies. I'll be learning about raw sewage, which is flowing into two popular lakes in Yorkshire and is feared will have a terrible impact on local wildlife. Not surprising. This week's Great Britain is a woman who has managed to pull her life back from the brink of disaster and is now a confidence coach and property developer. I'll be hearing what is expected to be one of the biggest compensation claims in UK legal history, as thousands of businesses seek recompense for being overcharged on transaction fees. Plus, plenty more from my brilliant panel, Julie Cook and Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford. But first, an update on the latest news from Ray Addison.
Thanks, Neil. Here's the latest. Ireland's Taoiseach Leo Varadkar says a deal on the Northern Ireland Protocol could be made in the next few days, but there's still a gap in negotiations. It comes as the Prime Minister faces criticism after proposing a meeting between King Charles and the President of the European Commission. Ursula von der Leyen was due to continue talks with Rishi Sunak before meeting the King, but her trip has now been cancelled. Labour says it would have had constitutional implications. Most members of the G20 have condemned the war in Ukraine, except for China and Russia, who refused to sign a joint declaration. It comes as Ukraine's president says he plans to meet China's Xi Jinping after Beijing set out a peace plan for the two countries. Volodymyr Zelensky says it would be beneficial for security around the world. Russian citizens living in Britain have staged a protest outside of the Russian embassy in London against their country's invasion of Ukraine. It comes a day after the one-year anniversary of the start of President Putin's incursion of the country. The widower of poisoned dissident Alexander Litvinenko, who was there, said she was proud of the protesters.
I'm very proud to see this big crowd of Russian people, a lot of young people. Maybe never went to this kind of protest, but I saw their faces and they've been all very loud to say how they're against the war, how they support Ukraine, how they hate Putin.
Well, hundreds have gathered in County Tyrone to demand an end to violence in Northern Ireland after the attempted murder of an off-duty policeman. Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell was shot outside a sports centre on Wednesday. He remains in critical condition. 5 suspects have been arrested. Detectives say the incident is being treated as terror-related and could be connected to the new IRA. The death toll from the earthquakes that hit Turkey and Syria has now surpassed 50,000. The United Nations estimates that 1.5 million people have been made homeless, with 500,000 new homes required. President Erdogan is pledging to rebuild within the year, but experts are warning not to put safety before speed. And a 3.7 magnitude earthquake was felt in South Wales last night. The British Geological Survey says it hit Bryn Mawr near Crickhowell just before midnight, with the tremor felt as far away as Cardiff. Residents on social media described being woken up to their whole house shaking. We're on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. This is the People's Channel, GB News. Time now for Neil Oliver.
Thanks, Ray, and welcome back. The shotgun deaths of 3 people at an English private school earlier this month have prompted renewed calls for changes to laws controlling gun ownership. Epsom College head Emma Pattison, her husband George and their 7-year-old daughter Letty were found dead in the grounds of the school earlier this month. Last week, an inquest found catastrophic failings led to the shotgun deaths of 5 people in Plymouth on the 12th of August 2021. When 22-year-old Jake Davison killed 4 people before turning his weapon on himself. My next guest, Peter Squires, a Professor of Criminology at Brighton University, joins me now to discuss whether the time has come to change the laws governing gun ownership. Good evening, thank you for joining me.
Good evening to you, yes.
Tell me first of all, what is the scale of gun deaths of this sort in this country?
You mean of people with firearm licences killing people?
We're dealing with shotguns here in the main, aren't we?
Yeah, almost entirely shotguns. It's the last real data that was collected by the Home Office referred to 14% of gun homicides being inflicted by people with licensed shotguns. Since then, they've not kept the data, and I've argued that this is an oversight, but nevertheless. So the Gun Control Network has kept its own log of media reports of gun deaths, and there are 30 gun deaths a year, and around 5 of those in any given year will be people who have a gun license and therefore hold that weapon in trust, keep it in their own home where it's vulnerable, I would say, and they have generally killed their partners. Sometimes their partners and their children, sometimes their partners and their children and themselves. Family annihilation situations. So yes, there are a number of them, not a lot, but it's a persistent problem.
And what is the legislation covering gun ownership here? I suppose what I'm really asking is how easy is it to obtain a licence to hold a shotgun or multiple shotguns in the home?
If you want a shotgun, it's slightly easier to get a shotgun than a rifle, and that's an issue I think we need to address because they're both lethal firearms. But you have to suggest why you need one, and it's really, if you can suggest why you need one as a pest controller, a gamekeeper, farmer, or a sports shooter, and that's generally where the major problem has lain. It's up to the police to argue why you don't merit a shotgun license. You say you want one, you come up with evidence, you have your referees, you go through the licensing process, and that's meant to weed out people who really have no claim, no legitimate claim to own a weapon.
Stuart, is this something that you think that there is a need to tighten up or to change legislation? I'm very much in favour of those who are out there who are legitimately owning shotguns and the rest for hunting, for sport and all of the rest of it. But does it sound to you like we're in a situation where there's a need for change?
Well, I think there's always a need to review processes. The scale of the problem, obviously, in the UK is nothing approaching what goes on in the USA. Lots of my friends have got shotgun licences. They've all gone through the due process and been granted the licence. I don't know many people who have rifles. I know 1 or 2. One of the things that struck me was that the cost of actually getting shotgun licence and a rifle licence, they're both between £80 and £85. But the cost of doing the clearance procedure, the sort of profiling, if you like, is somewhere in the region of £500. So it's not, the licensing thing is not paying its way. And that may suggest that it's too easy to get one. I'm no stranger to guns. I've shot guns during my military career, always in a controlled environment, and always been very careful about the rules and regulations and how to handle them without endangering other people. I think in Scotland, without being too Scottish exceptionalist about it, we've got a slightly different perception because of Dunblane and the fact that air rifles are also now under firearms legislation. And I had an air rifle for pest control when I lived up in the hills. And when I moved away, I had to, well, I sensibly handed it in because I had no further use for it.
Yeah. Peter, to come back to you, what changes would you say legitimately be considered? But you know, as Stuart's saying here, there are reasons, absolutely legitimate reasons to hold shotguns. So what changes would you suggest?
Oh, absolutely. I'm not anti-gun. I think we need to regularise our processes for licensing them. I think the bottom line, it comes down to the fact that police forces have had to run licensing on a shoestring for many years. The licence fee has not changed for years. It's £80 for a 5-year licence. That's £16 a year. Now as your other guest commented, that in no way covers the kind of security and checks and clearances that are necessary to assess if someone is suitable to have a gun. And we've enhanced those checks. There is a much more built-in check with medical authorities. Other people have to provide references. And I would go further, that it ought not to be something that is simply done on a 5-yearly basis as if it were a mere clerical exercise by the police, but there ought to be more proactive visits, unannounced visits, dip checks, perhaps even monitoring of some people's social media to make sure they're not making the kinds of threats that send an alarm bell ringing that this person is going off the rails. And that needs to be constant. The monitoring has to be constant. Therefore, it's going to be more expensive. But that's the way we weed out people who are perhaps developing dementia. There's a real problem in America that gun owners are getting older, and many of them are becoming confused. And we need to maintain a check on people's mental health if they've got a firearm in the home.
Are there reasons for thinking that, you know, where in these situations where it's a man, you know, killing his partner, sometimes children, and then himself, you know, these tragedies that we read about, not all that irregularly, they wouldn't happen if the shotgun hadn't been available to that individual? Would they not just find another way to commit the crime? Is the argument that if that possibility, that weapon wasn't in the equation, that the deaths would not occur?
I think you rightly raised the question that often the killing comes at the end of a lengthy period of domestic violence, and by the way, that should be another thing that is monitored to ensure that the person is of sound mind and not committing other violent offences against their family members. But you can't do that on an £88 5-yearly licence shoestring. And it's my argument, and I've been making this point for 10 years, that the kind of security checks that the police have to make, they will always scrimp and scrape on and run it on a shoestring if that licensing process is not fully funded. It costs the police to do it. If they had the resources to do it, my argument is they would do it better, they would be better trained, there would be a better national protocol, and they would be better at enforcing this legislation. We've heard many times about austerity policing, and frankly, the net is getting frayed, and cases are slipping through.
Evidently,
it's not. A shotgun is not cheap, and I am absolutely gobsmacked at the argument that people can't afford these licenses. Well, if they can't afford these licenses, I don't think they can afford the shotguns and the ammunition. It's a public safety priority. and we ought to take it more seriously.
Evidently, Peter, it's a very difficult balance that has to be struck between personal liberty, legitimate ownership and public safety. A very difficult judgment call. Peter Squires, Professor of Criminology at Brighton University, thank you for your input this evening.
OK, thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Moving on, stomach-turning footage, frankly, of raw sewage flowing from a water pipe into 2 lakes in Yorkshire has prompted campaigners to slam the vile stench and the impact on wildlife. Solid waste, soiled loo roll, wet wipes and used sanitary products have been flowing into marshland at Freeman's Cut and Brookfoot Lake, used for water skiing and angling, including by disabled children in Brighouse in West Yorkshire, for more than 2 months. Joining me to talk about the horror of it all and what should be done is Mark Barrow from Beneath British Water. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening.
This is dreadful. I've seen the images, I've seen the pictures. What's going on, basically? Where is this sewage coming from?
The sewage appears to be a misconnected pipe, and in theory, more or less coming direct from the toilets. And this has been going on since the beginning of December. And we're now obviously at the end of February. The Angling Club got in touch with me, obviously, because I do campaigning for clean rivers, and asked if I would try and help. So 2 weeks ago, I started putting the video footage out there. And I've got to admit, I was absolutely appalled at what's going on. And the smell is absolutely horrendous. And in some areas, it's ankle deep in human waste.
Now, it's been, as you say, I think it's been going on for nearly 10 weeks.
Yes.
Why on earth?
Yes.
And you say it's something as basic as a misconnected pipe. Why isn't it being dealt with?
I think because it's out of sight, it's out of mind, and yet again, the freshwater environment is suffering. If that pipe was coming out onto a high street, that would have been sorted within 2 weeks. But because you obviously don't know about it, it's just ignored. And I think between the likes of the council, Yorkshire Water and the Environment Agency, they need to get their act together and get this sorted, because it is appalling.
Bear with me while I just talk to my guests in the studio. Julie, that's your worst nightmare, isn't it? You're talking about it's a place where people go for recreation, whatever, angling and all the rest of it, and it's raw human sewage.
It's disgusting. I mean, I was reading about this on the way in today, and what our guest has just said is completely right. If this was happening outside, a high street shop, it would have been sorted, would have had, cones around it, do not come near. But because it's in our waterways and killing our wildlife, frankly, if you don't see it, it's not there. But for the people who walk around there, it very much is. But I was also reading on my way in that the water companies have had 2,800 written warnings in 2022 about problems. And our sewage is apparently 80% over capacity of our sewage. So, I mean, there's a lot more to it, I think, than just the burst pipe in this case. But I think, it's indicative of what we need to do is a lot bigger than that.
Yeah. Mark, if you're still with me there, is this just another case of the profits that water companies are able to make means that they are prepared to take the occasional hit or on whatever regularity of this kind of disgrace?
To be quite honest, where water companies are concerned, nothing surprises me. Because obviously I do a lot of campaigning and I do underwater filming in rivers. Every dive I do, I encounter sewage pollution, and it's appalling. So, where water companies are concerned, nothing surprises me. But this should not have gone on as long as it has done. The Environment Agency tested the water, and that came back at 7 parts per million. Now, I'll stand corrected, but I'm sure 0.25 parts per million, anything over that can affect, obviously, the health of the fish. And then, obviously, you've got the water skiing club that are obviously using the water, and I think they've actually temporarily closed the lake because they obviously don't want to go in it.
Yeah, I was going to say, are people aware? Are people, obviously, you're showing you've taken footage in a specific area, but in terms of the entirety of the lake, you could be blissfully unaware that this was going on, I presume. Are people actively being warned not to go near?
Yes, they are, and some of the anglers have actually started to become ill over the last few weeks. So the angling club now is going around all its members and asking them, obviously, if they've had any symptoms. And obviously the club uses the lake for disabled children. You know, they shouldn't have to put up with this. It's 2022, not 1822.
What is the wider scale? You're obviously involved in this, pollution in our waterways. Can you give us a sense of the scale across England and Wales? How often this is happening?
Somewhere daily on a river there is sewage entering, and it's as simple as that. Every time I go in the river, I encounter sewage pollution. That could be via sewage litter, which obviously can involve sanitary towels and everything that's literally flushed down the toilet. September 2000. The overall health of rivers in England and Wales was round about 92%. You move forward 22 years, and we're now down to 14%. You know, when we should be striving to move forwards, we're going backwards at a massive scale, and it's appalling. Yet we'll preach to other countries about what they should do, yet we are treating our own backyard like an open sewer.
Stuart, I listen to testimony like this, and we're being bombarded all the time by politicians and the rest talking about saving the planet. Which, who's like, save the puppies. Who's going to argue with you if you say you want to save the planet? Yeah. And yet we're invited to turn a blind eye to daily pollution entering the waterways. We're fouling our own nest.
Well, we are indeed, and one wonders, and your guest may know whether there's any correlation between this and the privatisation of water services in England and Wales, not in Scotland where it's still publicly owned. But also, and I don't know which particular water companies we're talking about here, but they are profit-making organisations with chief executives who, in some cases, earn vast salaries. And there must be penalty clauses in their contracts, which EA, for reasons beyond me, doesn't seem to be able to enforce.
Mark, I think I'm right. You'd be listening to that from Stuart there. I think I'm right in saying, though, that the profits that are available from the ownership and the running of this part of the infrastructure means that you can write off the kind of fines that apply for this kind of incident. And so, is there any active campaigning, any likelihood of a couple of knots being stuck on the end of the likely penalties for this kind of infringement, so that it actually becomes in the interests of these companies to prevent and to make sure this doesn't happen?
It needs to be a few more knots, to be quite honest, because the money they are making is life-changing amounts. And the privatisation scheme has literally failed for two main reasons: government stupidity and corporate greed. And that's what it boils down to. We shouldn't be like this.
It shouldn't be like this. Government stupidity and corporate greed. You're absolutely right. Mark Barrow from Beneath British Waters, thank you for bringing our attention to this evening.
Thank you.
Andrew Pitts, Calderdale Council's Assistant Director, by way of a statement, said, "We are working on an ongoing investigation into the reported watercourse pollution in Brighouse. In cases that relate to a watercourse, we work with the Environment Agency and other organisations such as Yorkshire Water to ensure we protect public health and the wider environment in Calderdale." I'm sure we all feel the better for that. After the break, I'll be meeting this week's Great Britain, and Natalie Bailey will tell us about how she turned her life around from the brink of despair to become a successful confidence coach and businesswoman.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we kick off with the People's Hour and your video calls. Who would make the best Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer? That's the choice facing the nation. In my big opinion, the sinister plan to turn Britain vegan. Those seeking to take meat off our plates can burger off. In my take at 10, Prince Harry wants an apology before attending the coronation. It's my view the apology should come from him. Plus my all-star panel and tomorrow's papers. See you at 8.
Welcome back. It's time now to meet this week's Great Britain. And the Great Britain this week is Natalie Bailey. Well deserving of the term, I have to say. When she was younger, Natalie got caught up, in her own words, with the wrong crowd and found herself partying every night to mask low self-esteem and depression. And realising things needed to change, Natalie took stock and managed to turn her life around. She's now a confidence coach who works with entrepreneurs and business owners and has a successful business herself, a property development company that she runs with her mum. She joins me now. Good evening, Natalie.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having me.
It's a pleasure. It sounds, you won't mind me saying, you were leading a bit of a self-destructive lifestyle for a while there.
Very. In that world, it looks like you're living your best life and you surround yourself with the people that seem to be having the best life. But actually what I was doing was masking that depression and loneliness because I moved to Magaluf on my own. Literally just quit my job, got on a plane and was like, I'm going to do this for 3 months and where are we? I still live in Mallorca now. But being around the wrong people, it was very, very difficult. Like, you know when you have those people that just phone you because they want something from you and you're able to do that? So
you had to adopt a certain character and a certain behaviour just to keep the whole thing going.
To keep the whole thing going and masking what I was masking with fake confidence. Whereas now I've been able to really dig into myself and understand how to change that and have a real level of confidence.
What prompted the change? You know, what did you literally wake up one morning and think, I've had enough of this?
Kind of. A few of my friends were arrested. And that was a huge wake-up call to me because I thought I can't go down this route anymore and have to make that call to my mum because obviously I love my mum and my dad.
And what did you do? I mean, obviously you were in the midst of a lifestyle that was self-destructive. Yeah. So how did you go about turning it into something positive?
I had to think what was the complete opposite of what I was doing and I had a chat with my nan. And we went and retrained as a personal trainer. So when I did that, I did the exercise referral diploma as well as the life coaching course to go with it. Because I thought if I can use this for good, then I can really help people, but ultimately helping myself. Like when you look after your physical health, you look after your mental health, and you feel so much better. And I realised that that's what I needed to do.
And I'm interested in the fact that it was your mum and your nan that were instrumental. It was family.
Yeah.
You know, you had made whatever else was going on, you still had that support network from your family that were able to pull you out of what you were in.
Yeah, like I'm really close with my mum and my dad. Like Saturday is normally with Dad football. That's what we do together. And like with my mum, because we now work together as well, we have a very close bond. So when my nan passed away, we realised that we needed to do something to build a legacy together, to be able to give back, because I didn't want to get to the end of my life and think, I wish I'd done this, I wish I'd done that. So family and community is very, very important.
And tell me about the nature of what it is that you're doing, because it's a combination, I take it, this confidence coaching and also the property development. How's that working out?
So when we got into property, we've just completed a 30-unit conversion. So we took a decommissioned care home.
Is this in Mallorca?
This is in England.
Oh, this is in England, right?
Yeah, so we do the property stuff in England. But I realised from doing property trainings and talking to entrepreneurs that there was something missing. And the thing that people held back with things like social media, the confidence to call agents, not having enough belief in themselves that they could go and do something, which made me tap back into what I learned when I was a PT and coaching people then to create what we do now, which is health, wealth and happiness, because you need all of those things. I call it the triangle of life, because it helps you to find yourself rather than like getting lost in the Bermuda Triangle.
It's quite simple at the end of the day, isn't it? It's about hopefully getting support from family and simple things like confidence and that determination to turn things around. That's where the opportunity comes from.
Well, it comes from. I mean, it comes from. You know, if you don't mind me flattering you, it comes from strength of character.
Thank you.
And that is something that's been inculcated in you through your family, and your experiences and the choice that you've made not to go down that path anymore. Which is a very difficult thing to do if that's the way you've been for several years.
Yeah.
But I think it's a fantastic story, and I think a huge example to other people. Say, look, it can be done.
How is it though working with your mum? Because that's not going to be ideal for just everyone, I don't think.
It took a little while for us to work out who needs to do what. And then also have family time that's not business time, because otherwise you do just get embroiled in stuff, and we would snap at each other. But we've got a really good relationship now where it does work, and part of that is being able to lean on each other for support, because ultimately the people you surround yourself with make all of the difference. So that's why community to me now is so important.
And tell me about the confidence coaching. How do people come to you? How do you make contact with those who need that help?
So I have a podcast which is called Confidence Mastery, and it was 3 years old this week, so 150 episodes. Actually had Charlie Sansom on it. He says hello, by the way.
Oh, right, yes.
So through lots of social media, I do public speaking. So, like, travelling the country and just basically by putting myself out there and demonstrating the lifestyle that I teach people.
It's a massive turnaround. I mean, really, you know, when you talk about what you were, you know, you didn't go into too much detail, but a self-destructive lifestyle, and now you're in a position where you're in property development and you're helping other people to turn their lives around as well. It's a massive credit to you.
Thank you.
So,
in those moments, like being around the wrong people and living that kind of lifestyle, it did hurt, because you're not in a place where you can get the help that you need, because it's a constant circle. So having that catalyst for change and being able to do something better, and because I've been there and been through it and been depressed and I've been lonely, and if you think about the last 3 years as well, we've all been pulled away from each other, and if you are lonely or depressed and you need help, ask for it.
Yes.
Because if you don't ask, you never get.
Yeah, take that first step. Well done, Natalie Bailey. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
You've brightened up the evening and you're definitely the Great Britain, so thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Keep doing what you're doing.
I will do.
Another break, here we are, after which I'll be learning about what it is, what's expected to be one of the biggest compensation claims in UK legal history, as thousands of businesses seek recompense for being overcharged on transaction fees. See you in a couple of minutes.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. One of the biggest compensation claims in UK legal history has been launched on behalf of hundreds of thousands of British businesses. Having been allegedly overcharged on MasterCard and Visa card transactions, lawyers acting for the businesses will seek to recoup billions of pounds worth of fees. Joining me now to talk us through the complexities of it all is lawyer Jeremy Robinson. Jeremy, thank you for coming in.
Great to be here, Neil.
In relatively simple terms, what has happened here?
Well, the problem is actually, at its core, quite simple. Businesses up and down the country have been paying too much to their banks in charges just for the right to accept payment by debit or credit card. And this is all because MasterCard and Visa have a rule that requires the banks to charge each other fees for accepting these cards, and the banks just pass it on to the businesses. And the music stops there. And it's completely unnecessary. And even though the percentage amounts added to each transaction are actually really, really small, we're talking 0.2, 0.3% here, it adds up very, very quickly. So even if you take, for example, a relatively small convenience store, mid-sized grocery store, that might have a turnover, let's say, of £3 million a year. On an annual basis, we've calculated, assuming everybody is paying by card, that's probably £7,500 of unnecessary excess fees. Now, we're able to bring our case from 6 years back. So 6 years of those fees, that's £45,000.
For just that one local,
for that one
mid-sized
local store.
grocery.
If we're talking hundreds of thousands.
When you say unnecessary, at what point does unnecessary become unlawful? I mean, has a crime been committed here by making these unnecessary charges?
Well, it's not exactly a crime. What we're talking about here is anti-competitive behaviour. So in a normal competitive world, the banks would decide between themselves, well, they would decide each for themselves what fees they would charge to businesses for having their business. But what we've got here is that most of the bank charges which businesses pay every month are set from elsewhere. So not by a competitive process between the banks, but by virtue of their membership of the MasterCard and Visa schemes. And that's anti-competitive. The banks themselves should individually decide their own conduct, but they have this rule.
Well, it sounds like a kind of knowing negligence. The banks understand this because it's in their interests to recoup this kind of profit per transaction. And the fact that the little business that's just accepting payment doesn't know. There's a kind of knowing, they're too silly to realise this is happening, so we'll just let them pick up the tab.
Well, I think you're right. I think most businesses are probably unaware that this is actually happening. Whether it be your local barber shop, your local 7-Eleven, corner shop, they have their charges for having their card machines, and that's all they know.
So they're having their pockets picked?
Yes, in a way.
What is the big number? You know, you talk about one, you used the example of a single shop. What is the big number that has been unnecessarily charged to hundreds of thousands of businesses?
It's a very, very big... We are talking well into the billions as the total size of the claim, and we could be talking 7.5, 10 billion plus interest for the period of the claim. So it's a truly massive claim.
And will it work? I mean, will all of these companies get back every sou of unnecessary charge that was levelled against them?
Well, the way in which we're doing it, we're bringing this as a class action, as a funded class action.
What is a funded class action?
So we have an investor called Benchmark Advisors. They have invested in our claim. And what that means is that the vast majority of businesses, if we win, the vast majority of businesses will be allocated a sum from a pot, and they will get 100% of that sum back. You've asked me whether or not we will win. We are very confident we're going to win. And the reason we're confident is that there have been a number of cases against MasterCard and Visa that have been taken at the European Commission level and have been taken in the courts in the UK. And in the courts in the UK, that's been on behalf of the very, very large supermarkets, which ultimately led to settlements, high-value settlements. And we are adopting exactly the same principles, exactly the same economic theory, legal theory behind this, and we are applying it to the entire economy, because it's not good enough that only the very biggest companies with the very deepest pockets have the ability to pursue the corporate giants like this.
Julie, you know what it says to me? It's no wonder the banks want everyone to make transactions with plastic cards, and then the next iteration of that is going to be, central bank digital currencies. Because when all of that is taken away out of sight, so that we're invited for the sake of convenience to not know what's happening, this is what you get.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a point not two of a pence here and there. But no wonder the banks want this kind of transaction going on, because they can recoup billions.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's two things. It's one that we have become much more of a cashless society, especially since COVID, where we've all had to use our cards more. So this must have gone huge during that period. But also a lot of, as you say, businesses don't know that these little pennies here and there will add up massively. And it's really interesting that you're also looking at those smaller businesses. I think that's great, because your little post office person or your convenience store owner who... that £7,000 or £8,000 perhaps a year or more is quite life-changing to them. So I think it's brilliant that we're not just looking at the big businesses here, we're looking at the smaller people too.
No wonder they don't want us using cash as well, is what I would say. Because a straightforward cash transaction, none of this is even possible. I mean, no wonder the banks would rather we weren't using cash.
Well, of course, there are other complexities around the use of cash versus the use of cards, and obviously our case is not about encouraging people to use one form of payment or another. Our case is that the businesses are accepting the cards are a fact, and the fees that they have to pay to their banks because of MasterCard and Visa's conduct are too high, and we want to get that back.
So if your case is successful, will the rules be changed? Will the system be corrected?
We would like our case to be part of a broader campaign by which one day we hope these fees are abolished entirely. We have spoken to some officials in government about this. This is what we'd like to see, but we don't have control over the legislation. We are not there drafting the legislation. What we can try and do is put some pounds back in the pockets of these businesses, and so they can get something back after the really difficult time on the high street over the last few years.
Billions and billions of pounds hanging in the balance.
Exactly.
Jeremy Robinson, lawyer, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I'll want an update in due course. Coming to another break now, and as we near the film industry's big night of the year, we'll be learning about how the Academy Awards are going to great lengths to avoid a repeat of last year's scandal.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Welcome back. We're on the home stretch now. One of the biggest show business stories of last year came at the Oscars when Hollywood megastar Will Smith made headlines around the globe by slapping his fellow actor Chris Rock across the face in front of an audience of millions. As the footage hit the headlines around the world, it seems the bosses of the Academy Awards were already thinking about how they could avoid a recurrence of such scenes. Joining me now to tell me what they came up with, I'm delighted to welcome the show business reporter and author Nelson Aspen, live from New York. Nelson, good evening.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
No, great to have you on the show. This was quite the thing. There's never been anything quite like what we witnessed last year at the Oscars. Unique.
That's right. It was the slap seen and heard around the world, and arguably the most entertaining moment of that often interminable broadcast that goes on for so many hours. But it was bad. It was really, really bad, and it damaged Will's career. He's been banned from all Academy events for a decade, and no one was more surprised by it, except for maybe Chris Rock, than the Academy executives themselves. So they've decided to take action, and the CEO, Bill Kramer, has announced that they have formed a crisis team, and an actual crisis team will be on hand, probably up in the broadcast booth, and a few of them backstage as well, in case anything goes off the rails. Now, what's interesting about this so-called crisis team, we love live television, that's why we do it, right? But something as violent as an assault on a comedian is not good. But this crisis team was actually put into place shortly after the nominations were announced this year. You might recall the name Andrea Riseborough. She's up for Best Leading Actress for her film To Leslie. People had never heard of her. They didn't know the film, and they blamed an A-lister campaign to try and get her nomination. Viola Davis was snubbed as a result of this. A lot of people thought she would get a nomination. So this crisis team was formed then to investigate the nomination process. They let the nomination stay, but they also let the crisis team stay, and this is how they're going to use it.
Are they not just milking it in that there's no such thing as bad publicity sense? Because surely any actor seeing what happened to Will Smith in the aftermath of what he did, the last thing that they would contemplate doing was a repeat performance.
I think you're overestimating the egos of actors. I think there are a lot of actors that would sort of look for opportunities to gain notoriety and use the Oscars as a platform to do just that. But, that is the magic of the show. Remember when Faye Dunaway announced the wrong winner for Best Picture a couple of years ago? She said La La Land, but it wasn't La La Land. So,
yes.
Or maybe when David Niven famously had a streaker run naked behind him while he was trying to present an award. So we do want those unscripted moments, but we can't let it go into the realm of physical assault.
Now, it's just a couple of weeks, isn't it, until the awards? I think that's right. Which films which are the runners and riders which have caught the eye of the Academy this year?
That's right. It's March 12th. And of course, they've nominated 10 films for Best Picture. And I think what's interesting is that among those nominees for Best Picture are blockbusters, films like Top Gun Maverick and Avatar, The Way of Water. And I think this is a very concentrated effort by the Academy to get crowd pleasers in there. Very few people have gone out to the movie theater to see All Quiet on the Western Front, which is fantastic and probably should win, but it's not a popular film. And this is why the ratings for shows like the Academy Awards are dwindling, because the general public really doesn't have an interest in art films or films they haven't heard of. They want to see and celebrate the films that they go out and eat popcorn to watch.
Yeah, because I can remember being so invested in the Oscars year in and year out. You're watching it on the television, because I would have seen lots of the films, if not all of the films that were up, because it was the big, crowd-pleasing movies that tended to be to the fore of those nominations. And somehow it drifted into territory where it was films that nobody had seen, nobody had heard of. And I drifted away from the whole process altogether. I haven't watched the Oscars in years.
Yeah, we've got to draw you back in. I mean, if you have a favorite film that has been nominated, of course you're more likely to watch, and you have to invest a lot of time into doing these kinds of things. I'm a member of both the Screen Actors Guild and the Critics' Choice Association, so I get to vote for those award shows. And there is so much content, especially now that streaming has entered our universe. There is so much content to go through. It's impossible to see it all. So to whittle it down and find those nominees is a titanic task indeed.
Oh, nice name check of a past winner. What would be the one that you would put your money on as likely to sweep the boards?
Well, I think it's going to be a big year for Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. It's not only a dynamic, entertaining film, but it ticks a lot of the boxes for Hollywood. It has it has a tremendously diverse cast, but it also has crowd pleasers. Everybody loves Jamie Lee Curtis. So we see her with her first Oscar nomination playing a role that's almost completely unrecognizable from how we know her. And you've got this strong Asian American cast, and it's a highly entertaining film. So my money's on that one. And of course, Cate Blanchett's masterpiece performance in Tar will likely get a lot of Oscar love as well.
Show business reporter and author, of course, Nelson Aspin, thank you so much for your insight this evening. Good to see you.
Thank you.
It was quite a moment, wasn't it, Stuart? That slap.
Well, it was. I mean, I did sort of slightly laugh at it because
I thought it was staged.
It was sort of handbags at 10 metres, you know, amongst the lovies of Hollywood. But I think there's probably there's a serious angle to it that it was only a slap, but it could have been a knife. And I don't know whether the celebs are actually even go through body scanners when they come in, because no one would imagine that Will Smith would, for example, bring a gun into the ceremony with him. But someone else might.
I felt, as I was saying to Nelson, I drifted away from it. It became a complete irrelevance to me because I didn't know what films we're talking about. And I thought they'd actually staged it somehow because it was going to garner headlines.
Yeah, because, I mean, as you say, the Oscars has become, let's face it, it's become a bit boring, hasn't it? And it's very into virtue signalling and let's all wear black this year and let's all do this year and Me Too and all this stuff. And I think that was the first time in years I found it interesting. And as you say, that was not a punch, it was a slap.
Yeah. But remember when it was a film like, Titanic, when Titanic won everything, everyone had seen it. It was one of those films that just everybody went to see.
Yeah.
And now I would look at the list of, in the last few years, I would look at the list and think I had no intention of seeing any of those films, and so therefore.
Well, I mean, your man from New York was talking about films that I have no idea they even existed.
Yeah, I know with All Quiet on the Western Front has got all the love here. But it's a German film, and it's in the German language, and the German critics are not loving it. And because the novel, Henri Maria Remarque's novel, is hugely revered, and this film is not regarded as a proper adaptation.
If you look at the sort of 1920s or 1930 black and white version, it's very true to the novel and starts and goes through the whole history of the First World War, whereas the current new version, in which I think the cinematography is great, but it does away with the storyline and just invents it sort of halfway through the progress of the war. So I think maybe I'm too critical because I'm ex-military. I can spot these things and say no, he wouldn't have worn his hat that way.
Yeah. No, have you got a favourite? Have you got, just quickly?
Favourite film of all time?
No, a favourite for this year.
Oh, for this year? Well, like Stuart, I haven't seen any of them. I haven't been to the cinema, Neil, for about 15 years, so I'm not the person to ask. I don't have time to go to the cinema, but yeah.
I share your pain. I used to go all the time, and now it's a very rare occurrence. That's all from me on Neil Oliver Live. My thanks, as always, to my panel, to Julie Cook, to Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford. I'll be back at 6 o'clock next Saturday. Next up, it's Mark Dolan tonight. Mark, what have you got in the show for us?
Neil, another brilliant show. The best bits of cinema are your monologues every Saturday night, Neil. Let me tell you, they should win an Oscar every time. Except it's not made up, it's not a script, it's the plain truth. We've got a busy show. We start with the People's Hour, in which I'm taking your video calls. And after 9, I'll be dealing with Prince Harry, who wants an apology in exchange for appearing at the King's wonderful, important celebrations. He should be saying sorry himself.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh yes, already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to Mark Dolan tonight, and we kick off with the People's Hour, in which I'm taking your video calls on a range of topics, including, is Keir Starmer Tony Blair 2.0? That's what we're asking. Also, why aren't politicians allowed to be Christians anymore? We'll talk about Roald Dahl, a U-turn from the publishers of his brilliant books, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. They are now going to publish the original version in its politically incorrect glory. Is wokeism in decline? And should the UK grow more of its own food, given the fact that we're running out of turnips? Lots to get through. Don't forget, after 9, My Big Opinion, in which I'll be dealing with the Green Lobby, who want to take meat off your plate. And My Take at 10, in which I'll be sorting out Prince Harry, who wants an apology in return for a place at King Charles's wonderful coronation celebrations. If anyone is apologising, it should be Harry himself. A busy 3 hours. The People's Panel next. But first, the headlines with Ray.
Thanks, Mark. Here's the latest. Rishi Sunak says he's giving everything and hopes to achieve a new deal over the Northern Ireland Protocol by the end of this weekend. Speaking to the Sunday Times, the Prime Minister said he's hopeful of a positive outcome with the European Union. Describing it as unfinished business, he said it's vital to ensure a return to power sharing in the province. The comments come after Ireland's Taoiseach Leo Varadkar said an agreement was possible but not guaranteed in the coming days. Most members of the G20 have condemned the war in Ukraine, except for China and Russia, who refused to sign a joint declaration. It comes as Ukraine's president says he plans to meet China's Xi Jinping after Beijing set out a peace plan for the two countries. Volodymyr Zelensky says it would be beneficial for security around the world. Russian citizens living in Britain have staged a protest outside of the Russian embassy in